Major Lindsay and Africa presents Bouncing Back, conversations about resilience for lawyers.
Welcome to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. This podcast is brought to you by Major Lindsay and Africa, the global leader in legal search and consulting. I'm your host, Rebecca Glatzer. I'm a partner in the Associate Practice Group at Major Lindsay and Africa. In this podcast, I'll speak to successful professionals about the hiccups, bumps, bruises, and setbacks they've experienced in their careers and personal lives, and how they ultimately bounce back from those experiences to thrive. Today, my guest is Praju Tuladhar. Currently, Praju is Vice President at Remitly, a Seattle-based fintech. Prior to that, he spent nearly a decade at Amazon, serving most recently as the head of legal for Amazon Prime. He began his legal career at Sidley Austin in Chicago. Praju, like me, is a U of I alum. He graduated from the University of Illinois College of Law in 2008. He received his undergraduate degree from Vassar College in 2000, majoring in computer science and economics, and also receiving his master's degree from the University of Maryland, College Park in telecommunications engineering and management in 2001. Praju is a champion of diversity, equity, and inclusion. He serves as the treasurer of the National LGBTQ+ Bar Foundation, and also coaches diverse attorneys, executives, and professionals looking to unlock their effectiveness and to combat marginalization. In his spare time, he enjoys real estate investing, helping his husband manage his wellness-based small businesses, advising BIPOC and LGBTQ+-led startups, and writing about personal finance and aging well. Praju, thank you for being my guest today.
Hey, Rebecca, thank you so much for having me.
Well, Praju, in a prior conversation, you mentioned that you had a tough time in undergrad. Tell me what happened.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, I had a tough time, but I also had a really good time. I guess the two are related. So my freshman year at Vassar, first semester, I was just kind of taking it all in and was probably a little too immature to go straight to having all of that freedom. And, unfortunately, that showed up in my academics. And, I ultimately ended up failing a math class that I took there. So I, had never really had a setback like that before academically. I'd always kind of gotten by, done fine, done well. But, in the college environment, my old tricks weren't working anymore. And it, was really a devastating blow to me. So, that was one of the first things that kind of went wrong in my undergraduate career. And I guess on my way to becoming a professional.
Yeah, that had to be a blow and a sort of wake-up call. How did you overcome that? What did you do next to sort of pull yourself out of that rut?
Well, I think in a lot of ways it was a blessing in disguise, and really, the foundation for I think what's made me successful down the road. Things weren't going on sort of a straight and narrow path for me from that point forward, and I really had to figure out how to recover from that, because I knew that I wanted to go on to, graduate studies. I wanted to go into having a professional career, that type of thing. And, having a bad academic record was really going to be a hindrance to that. And so, I kind of had, after getting over the embarrassment and, of course, having to tell my parents about this terrible thing that had happened, and just kind of getting them ready for that disappointment. Surprisingly, my family was very supportive, and it didn't go, it wasn't exactly as terrible as I thought it was going to be telling them, which is, I think, a true testament to them as, being supportive parents. But I really had to go in and figure out how to recover from this. And I think learn what levers I had, what I could rely on myself for. And, I found a path forward. Ultimately, I took some summer school courses to retake the class so that I didn't really miss anything in the sequence or timing when I went back, for the summer after undergraduate. Junior year, a lot of people go abroad that year. It's called junior year abroad. I think a lot of schools have that. that was something that I couldn't do because I had to, take additional classes to ultimately get what I wanted, which was a major in computer science and economics. And unfortunately, that math class was going to be a gating issue for me if I didn't recover from it. And so I had to sort of really study the environment that I was in and understand sort of what the rules were in a really detailed way so that I could figure out how to navigate them in a way that worked for me and, may not have been the traditional path that folks would take. And, I grew up really fast after that happened. And so, like I said, I think just really understanding the rules of the game I was playing and figuring out how to course correct and rely on myself got me there. It wasn't an easy road. There were a lot of sacrifices that I had to make in terms of, the things that I did going forward for my undergraduate studies, but it was definitely, I think, the foundation for, me reaching where I am today, which I'm really proud of. So hard time, but I think those are the things that you learn the most from, Rebecca.
Yeah, definitely. And I have to say that I'm so impressed because I think a lesser person, and by lesser person, I probably think like me, would go to the, oh, I can't hack it. Let me switch my major to something easier or something that maybe comes more naturally to me or something that just isn't going to be so math rigorous or math forward. And so I'm really impressed that you kind of, you stuck with it and you have this, double major. Another way to sort of respond to this is say, well, maybe I'll just pick one of these instead of doing both. I'm curious, when you talked about learning about your environment, did you have any mentors or other resources that sort of assisted you, besides your supportive family, that helped you to sort of figure out, okay, this is what I need to do, and this is how I need to overcome it. I need to take up more classes. I need to take them during the summers. I need to, eschew fun things like the study abroad. But was there someone or something that helped guide your path?
I think it's really just building your network of people and getting as much information as you can. In undergraduate, I would say, before that, in high school going into college, I had, really great mentors and advisors that, kind of taught me well and gave me great tools. In undergraduate, I did have my advisors and that kind of thing, but in that particular case, I would say I was really just sort of like depending on myself, because I think a lot of people would have probably advised me to do, like you said, like maybe do something easier, maybe like don't go that path. But I knew what I wanted, and I knew that, I really had to figure out what was going to be right for me. And that wasn't necessarily going to be what a lot of external signals would be telling me. And so I think in that time, I really just sort of meditated on what I wanted the outcome to be and just figured out how I was going to deliver that for myself. Of course, I got information and spoke to advisors and, talked to like peers and probably more, senior folks that had gone through things. But it's really just kind of collecting all those bits of information and putting them together in a way that I knew was right for me is kind of how I would have overcome that particular period in my life.
Yeah, no, that's great and very impressive. And so impressive, your plan worked. You ended up going to graduate school to get a master's degree, got in to a great program at University of Maryland, College Park in telecommunication engineering and management. And I know that you mentioned in our prior conversation that a lot of your peers in that program were undergraduate electrical engineering students. Maybe had an easier time of you did, which again, thoroughly impressed. I say this, I'm projecting a little bit because I think I told you this before. I was at Georgia Tech for undergrad. I was surrounded by engineers, felt like a fish out of water most of the time, almost failed my own computer science course that was required to graduate from Georgia Tech in a public policy major. Everybody has to take
Wow.
computer science. Yeah, everybody has to take calculus, and everybody has to take a hard science to get out of Georgia Tech. By the skin of my teeth, my friend. I think it's, what did they say? B is for done. So I'm projecting here because I'm like, I don't know how you did this, because there's no, I don't know. I'm a lesser human. Like, I would not have opted to get a master's degree and be surrounded by a bunch of folks who went to engineering school for undergrad. And so I am curious about this experience for you and how that was.
Yeah, I think that this was probably my first experience with imposter syndrome. Like you said, all of my classmates were, engineering undergraduates. They'd come from great schools all around the world. A lot of my best friends that I made there, from Asia, India, all that kind of thing. It was such a fun time, but it was a really hard time because they all knew what they were doing way more than I did. And I, after undergraduate, having that sort of like devastating early part of my career, which I, ultimately recovered from, but was very difficult. I didn't want to have that again, and so I remember after kind of like the first week or so, I was walking away from the engineering building, and I was just like, oh my God, you got to quit. Like, I was talking about like learning to be strategic, and sometimes, that means just, cutting your losses and moving on. And I thought that this was going to be one of those situations. And I remember walking away from the engineering building there and just taking a long walk through the quad and just really figuring out if I was going to quit or not, because it would have been a totally legitimate thing for me to do. I think at that point, I had been studying, like I said, I know my circumstance. I had been studying the refund policy. Like, I was still going to get like a decent amount of my tuition back.
Dude, I feel you.
And then what I decided was that, okay, you're at this school, you have this great opportunity, you don't have anything else that you're focused on in your life right now except for, completing this master's. I didn't, have a family or anything at that point. And I said to myself, you know what, you have recovered before, but you know what it takes for you to learn now, Praju, right? One of the things that I think I matured along the way was really learning myself and like what it was that I needed to do to learn and learn what I needed to do to be successful. And I was like, okay, well, you built that foundation already. You know what to do. You know where your gaps are, and you have this great network of friends that have done this and can kind of let you know what are the fundamentals you're going to need to know or do to move forward. And I think there I really had such a great community of peers and fellow students who just really wanted everyone to be successful and kind of gave me the background on okay, get these study guides, like you can learn this like quickly in a week or so just by studying these. I think they have these like in law school they have those things that are like outlines. They have the same thing
Yes.
for engineering, like Sham series. And I was like, okay, I can do this, right? And so it was a hard beginning, but I really just did build the fundamentals sort of like based on what I knew I needed to do to build the foundation to be successful. And then ultimately was able to do that and get ahead of it in enough time that I actually was very very successful in my academic career there. I think I ultimately graduated with like a 3.9 or some super high GPA that I was really proud of. It was something that I didn't think I was going to do. And, that was the end result of, a conversation with myself where I was thinking about quitting. And, to be clear, there are things where I think it's totally fine to quit. And I think that was a learning that I had early on that I didn't know before, that like quitting is okay sometimes as well. But if you really want something and you think you can do it and you can set yourself up for success, that's also a path. But that's going to come with a lot of sacrifices. And, you just have to make a really well-informed decision on how you want to proceed. And that gives you real power, and so I'm super glad that I had that experience. But, I graduated in 2001, as you said, from that telecom engineering and management program. And, 2001 is also known as like the telecom collapse, which of course it seems to be a theme in my academic and professional career. But, there were the typical firms and such that were hiring, just weren't doing as much at that time because of it. And so I actually ended up working in e-commerce at Citigroup. I had done an internship there, like in high school, I feel like, and through college, I'd always kept a connection with the folks that I had worked with. And I got kind of a temporary job at Citigroup being an e-commerce manager and ultimately a new business development manager. And so went into that for a few years after my master's degree.
Gotcha. And I'm going to tease you or rib you a little bit. I'm like, Praju is a glutton for punishment because first you get the double major in undergrad in computer science and economics, and you go get a master's in engineering, and then you're like, oh, let's go to law school. Just total glutton for punishment here. From one lawyer to another, and ended up we were at the same school, not at the same time. I think we overlapped maybe by 1 year. But talk to me a little bit about that because I know, based on your undergrad grades, getting into sort of a top tier law school was a little bit of a climb, right? And I'm curious to understand your mentality with that.
Yeah. So like after I did my master's, I actually worked for like three years or so at Citigroup. So I took a little bit of a break before going straight into law school. One, because, I wanted to make some money. Two, because I just needed a little bit of a break from the academics. And, I just wanted to, I think, like grow up a little bit before I went back for more school. And I think it was a great opportunity to kind of like build some savings, get some professional experience, which, I think in the long run helped a lot, once I entered the legal profession, because a lot of people do go straight through and they don't have those opportunities to, work in an office or corporate or, that type of environment. And so, I had always known that I wanted to go to law school, but, I wanted to give it a little bit of time. And so when that time came in my sort of professional career, I decided that, okay, well, I didn't realize, I guess, at the time that, and I don't know how it is, these days, but at that point when I was going to law school, they only cared about your undergraduate GPA and your LSAT score. And it was almost like not relevant where you went or, all these different types of things. And there was one thing that was just going to be solid. I think I graduated with like a 3.02 or something from undergraduate. And so that was already sort of a limiting factor because I think a lot of the top schools, that was like outside of the range of GPAs that they would even consider. But the one thing that I could do was, address my LSAT. And so I took the LSAT practice test. I did horribly on it. I think I was like in the 50th percentile or something like that. And I was just like, okay, well, you got to get this up, And so I actually went back home. I moved back into my parents' house for like 3 months where I just said, you know what, you're going to study intensively for, the LSAT and just, figure out what you need to do. Again, figuring out what is it that I need to do to learn how to master this thing that's going to be so important. So, I was in Tempe, Arizona, which was a blast. Like I have to say, like these little breaks that I get from my career in school are a lot of fun. I had a great time, living in Arizona. I also took like a summer class in chemistry because I was thinking I might want to be a patent lawyer. And for some reason, I had to take a year of chemistry to sit for the patent bar I knew. So I did that also.
Oh, interesting.
And studied. Yeah. And then I studied for the LSAT and, got my scores up, my ability to like take that test really well. And I ended up scoring really high on the LSAT. And so that's sort of where I then had to look at, okay, well, what's the universe of schools that you can get into? And there's, at the time there was like a grid that you could look at where, you had your GPA, you had your LSAT, and then the probability that you would get into, a school. So I applied to a range of schools. I really thought that I wanted to go to school in California, but University of Illinois was sort of in that mix of places where it seemed like, a good school, and, I had a possibility of getting in. So of course I, applied there. And the University of Illinois was one of those schools that I, had a chance of getting into. And, ultimately I did get into a couple of California schools, but I got into University of Illinois, and I think just because of what their strategy was in terms of like moving up in the rankings, they were really looking for folks that had sort of high LSAT scores. And so my high LSAT score, low GPA split actually worked to my advantage, and they offered me a full tuition scholarship to go there. So ultimately, going to U of I was, one of the best decisions that, I had made, after coming to the realization that, going there was going to be the best deal for me in the long term. Like, even though I wanted to go to school in California, I was just like, I don't need to do that. Like, this is a great opportunity that you've been given, and it will free you up for the rest of your life if you don't get saddled with student loan debt and, that kind of thing. And I'm so grateful that I ultimately had that opportunity and, took it, because I ended up doing well in law school there, and Illinois places really well in Chicago. And, I didn't even realize the sort of like machine that I was going to be entering into when, I was able to get a job at, Sidley Austin. And I think that really helped me out quite a bit, because Sidley, at that point when I joined Sidley, I don't think I'd ever met so many people that ever went to Harvard in one place. but they do hire from other schools in the region, and I was one of those folks that was able to get in, and so joined Sidley from University of Illinois, and I think that really was really helpful for the rest of my legal career. But of course, I graduate in 2008, Rebecca, which,
graduated at a work time. For those of you who are listening and are not in the workforce, then it was the time of the Great Recession.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when I actually started there, most firms had laid off or just didn't, admit right away their class of 2008. But, Sidley actually didn't, delay or, defer any of the 2008. So I started in that time, and it was really scary because folks were worried about their job, their hours, that kind of thing. And so, my summer associate experience was like so lavish and, over the top, but then I come into work and it's like, oh, wow, this is totally different. And so, even in my practice group, I was in the global finance group. The type of work that I ended up having to do was more, in the restructuring front, doing bankruptcies. Also, if our practice group was slow, I really had to hunt for work. And so I looked for opportunities where, litigators needed, junior associates to do things. I maxed out sort of my pro bono hours that the firm would give you. And so even that first year, I did make what was considered, your hours for, doing well there, and then also meeting your bonus sort of like triggers. I was able to do that, but it was not because there was so much work available. It was because I went out to really hunt for it and find those opportunities. So that was a tough time to graduate, but a learning lesson in itself in terms of how to survive in the workplace, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's brilliant. And you're like the king of making lemonade out of lemons, Praju, like just over and over and over again. And for the listening audience, to sort of wrap up your, I know I'm summarizing it in 2 sentences and there's a lot more there, but you were ultimately recruited to Amazon. I was curious if that was Amazon recruiter reached out to you, or you knew someone at Amazon. Going in-house is sort of the golden goose for a lot of lawyers. They really, want that, that's sort of their ultimate career dream. I was curious how that shift came about from Sidley to Amazon.
Yeah, it's actually really funny. So I have only great things to say about Sidley Austin in terms of like, big law, place to do that. Sidley was the best place. Like I had such great colleagues, such great mentors. Like that was a place where I learned so much from the partners that I worked with and sort of the training that they gave me. Just learned a ton. It was a really grueling environment though, in terms of like the hours and the work. And so, 3 years in, I had gotten like a LinkedIn. It looked like spam. I remember. It was from an Amazon recruiter saying like, "Hey, we have an in-house opportunity," like da 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 da. And I thought it was spam at the time, and I sort of ignored it. And at 3 years in, I was still feeling like I had a lot to learn, and wanted to stay at the firm. But then sort of like 4 years in, I remember being on a deal like in the middle of the night, and I just couldn't do it anymore. I was like, this is not how I just can't work like this anymore. It's not for me. I don't think that I had really good boundaries in terms of like, my work and my life. And so I decided that I was going to kind of just stop being a lawyer, that I was going to, resign and, drive cross country, do all these things. And then I remembered that Amazon email I had, and I just replied back to it a year and a half later and said, hey, I think I'm ready to talk. And, believe it or not, 2 months after that, it was a real email. It wasn't just spam. I went through their interview process, like did all of that, and ultimately got the job at Amazon, which was the reason that I moved from Chicago to Seattle, where I've been for over the last decade. But it was really just, I think the recruiters were looking for folks like, your fourth and fifth year are really good times to kind of make the move in-house before you become,
yes,
I think, what they consider too senior for a period of time until you probably make partner. So I think I just happened to be sort of the right vintage, and like, having that sort of like profile of, like I said, being at a big firm opens a lot of doors for you. And so that's how that sort of opportunity came about.
No, that's great. That is fantastic. Well, I wanted to ask you a sort of segue here. I'm a little bit of a nerd, and in advance of starting this podcast, I read a lot of academic journal articles about resilience, and where does it come from, and is it innate, and like is this something that can be learned? And the consensus seems to be that, like, for some people it is more innate than for other people, but it's generally something that can be learned. And a lot of times people learn to be resilient by seeing how their mom or their grandparent or their sister or their brother handle difficult things. And I was curious, I mean, you are clearly a resilient human, Praju, and over and over and over again, making lemonade out of lemons, whatever life throws at you. And I'm just curious if you've given any thought to where that comes from, whether experiences in your youth or people in your life, or other, resources that you've tapped into. Where does that come from for you?
Oh, Rebecca, that's such an interesting question. I think if I had to think about it, my parents are both immigrants. They came here from Nepal when they were very, very young. Like my mom was 19 when she moved here. My dad was probably, in his mid-20s. They had both lost their parents when they were younger, both or one of their parents. And so just were sort of like out on their own really young, and then, moved to a whole new country and sort of set up like, a life here, and, raise their kids in a way that they could have the opportunities that, I did. And so I think just seeing my parents do that, and not really, I don't know if I thought about it as being resilient at the time, but just kind of like taking what the world gives you and making the best of it. Like that, I think my parents were really instrumental in kind of building that resilient framework for me. And then also, I'm gay, and when I was a kid, I was a little bit different the whole time, and so I guess I was always used to being sort of on the outside, but needing to still manage that and get through maybe, I wouldn't say that I was like bullied to the point of, anything traumatic or anything like that, but that was always an element of my growing up. I was different. I was different for a lot of reasons. I grew up in a really small town. We were brown. I was, different, like I said, effeminate, whatever, just, a little weird maybe. And so there was always this, I describe myself as like a consummate underdog because I don't know how to be any way but different or digging out of something. And so I think that might be the root of it, Rebecca, or, part of it.
That definitely makes sense. And it sounds like those differences are almost like you've honed them to be a superpower in a way. It's really impressive because it sounds like you had to once again make lemonade out of lemons at a very young age and kind of conceptualize what was happening to you and your circumstances and make the best of it. And I think and you've done it over and over and over again and continue to succeed, maybe because of it, not in spite of it. And I think that's wonderful and awesome. And I think it's a lesson for a lot of us who are listening to your story. It's like, you've got to make sense of it in a way so you can move forward and go forward in your life and achieve your dreams and your goals. I could talk to you for 3 more hours, but alas, I know you're a busy guy and you've got other things to do. Let me ask you this final question, which is, the legal profession can be rewarding in many ways. It's been rewarding for you in a lot of different ways. It can also be grueling, as you said explicitly, and also have kind of alluded to. What advice would you have for newly minted attorneys who are trying to kind of find their way in this profession? I feel like our profession sort of throws people in the deep end and you just kind of sort of have to swim your way out in a lot of ways. And I'd like to know, just sort of generally speaking, if someone's having a tough go of it and is trying to figure out if this is right for them and if so, like how to make it, what key pieces of advice would you give them?
I think the first piece of advice is that you have to be really excellent at, your skills, right? Despite everything and all of the challenges, you have to be really good at your job, right? So learn from the people that are doing really well, really take feedback that you're getting as a gift and, realize that, and this is if people are really, you feel people have your best interest in mind and, are helping you out, like really learn from those experiences, but be ready to invest a lot of time in sort of building your skills and your foundations, because being really good is important, and that's one thing that's going to take you a long way ahead. But then also, don't just focus on the technicalities of it or, the legalities of things. Focus on the pragmatism and how to solve problems. Like, what do your clients or your business partners really want? Because a lot of times, folks get intimidated working with lawyers, and, a lot of times the folks that you'll meet early in your career, the only contract that they might have ever seen is, the lease that they signed. And so understand, and I think be empathetic to the folks that you're working with and realize that you have a certain amount of privilege and power with that. But ultimately what people want are solutions to the problems that they're facing when they, work with lawyers. And so kind of like understanding the pragmatism of what we need to do as well to help people is important. And then ultimately know yourself and what brings you joy, because if you do something that isn't making you happy or doesn't energize you every day to get up and, get out of bed and do that, you're not going to be very happy or very fulfilled. And, for me, that came in in-house practice. I've really enjoyed being an in-house lawyer and the opportunities that that's given me. And I think that extended my legal career quite a bit. Maybe Rebecca, we could do another podcast on my in-house experience, because there's some, ups and downs there, ultimately highs. But I think that would be my advice to the next generation.
No, I think that's great. I think that's solid advice. Well, Praju, I want to thank you so much for giving me your time today, being so open and honest with me and our listeners. I got a lot out of our conversation, and I know that anyone listening to this podcast will get a lot out of the conversation as well. I sincerely appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. This was great. Thank you so much for making the time yourself. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you for listening to Bouncing Back, Resilience for Lawyers. Join us next time for another story about thriving after overcoming challenges. You can find Bouncing Back and other programming for lawyers on MLA's Legal Talk Network.